Take your nephew back. If the Jews recognize him, they will kill him. Wow. That dramatic warning, delivered by a Christian monk about a young boy in the desert, literally sets the stage for one of the most complex sequences in human history. Hello, and welcome to today's Explainer. We're looking at a truly fascinating piece of source material today that maps out the intricate, heavily layered history of the early Arabian Peninsula. We are specifically looking at the shifting alliances, the treaties, and the eventual conflicts between Prophet Muhammad and the local tribes of Medina. We're going to impartially unpack these historical accounts right from the sources to make sense of a highly dynamic era. Okay, let's dive into this. To really grasp the gravity of these events, we're going to walk through 6 chronological milestones. We'll start with the preconditions in Medina, move into the historic Treaty of Medina, and then examine the progressive fractures with the Banu Qaynuqa, the Banu Nadir, and the Banu Qurayza. Finally, we'll look at the ultimate culmination at Khyber. Now, to give us a solid footing, here is our mental roadmap, because, this isn't a story that happens overnight. Mapping it out chronologically, it spans from a prophecy made when Muhammad was just 12 years old, through a really tough decade of hardship in Mecca, into the critical post-migration years in Medina, characterized by treaties and early battles. It then peaks at the Battle of the Trench and resolves in the final years at Khyber. Keeping this sequence in the back of your mind will really help anchor the events we're about to explore. All right, let's start with Section 1, Background and Medina's Status, specifically looking at the economic preconditions. Because before we look at the conflicts, we have to understand the board as it was set. Why were these specific tribes living in the harsh Arabian desert in the first place? Well, our source text brings us back to this incredible quote. Picture this. A caravan is traveling from Mecca to the Levant, carrying a 12-year-old Muhammad and his uncle Abu Talib. A Christian monk named Bahira, who was well-versed in the Torah and the Gospel, observed environmental signs and recognized the boy as an awaited prophet. Bahira urgently advised Abu Talib to send the boy back, warning of mortal danger. According to the historical narrative provided, Jewish tribes had actually specifically migrated to the Arabian desert, settling around Medina and Khyber, because their scriptures prophesied the arrival of the final messenger in that very region. Now, what's really fascinating here is the power dynamic of pre-Islamic Medina. On one side, you had the local Arab tribes, the Aus and the Khazraj, and they were heavily divided, locked in generational warfare. On the exact opposite side, you had the Jewish tribes. Because the Aus and Khazraj flat out wouldn't trade with each other, the Jewish tribes became the unified economic hub. Through really savvy trading in grain, dates, cloth, and a massive system of loans, they gained huge financial leverage, effectively controlling Medina's economy. And this matters immensely because understanding these economic mechanics, who controls the money and the food, is the absolute key to understanding everything that happens next. So that brings us to Section 2, the historic Treaty of Medina, and the immense challenge of forging an alliance. After 10 years of facing fierce opposition in Mecca, Prophet Muhammad and his followers migrated to Medina. But entering a city completely fragmented by economic leverage and tribal warfare meant that forging a unified alliance was an absolute necessity for survival. So to stabilize the region, this groundbreaking agreement is drafted, the Charter of Medina. Now, what's really interesting about the slide, and you'll want to pay close attention to these specific stipulations, is that the breaking of these rules is exactly what drives the rest of the historical narrative. The Charter established joint defense against any external attack. It explicitly prohibited sheltering the enemy Quraysh of Mecca. It guaranteed complete religious freedom for all. It mandated shared responsibility for community fines or blood money, and established Muhammad as the final arbitrator of disputes. On paper, it was a totally brilliant framework for peace. But, as we know, peace is often pretty fragile. Let's look at Section 3, the exile of Banu Qaynuqa, which marks the first major fracture. Following the Muslims' really unexpected victory at the Battle of Badr, regional tensions and underlying resentments just began to simmer. The catalyst for the first real breach of the treaty actually happened in a marketplace. As outlined in the source, an Arab woman visiting the Banu Qaynuqa bazaar was mocked and tricked by a shopkeeper, causing her veil to be lifted. A Muslim man heard her cries and killed the shopkeeper in her defense, and then the local tribesmen immediately retaliated and killed the Muslim man. What started as an isolated incident of harassment in the market rapidly escalated into swift, violent retaliatory killings. It's a classic example of how literally a single spark can burn down an entire peace treaty. When Prophet Muhammad approached the Banu Qaynuqa to remind them of the agreement, the source states they boastfully dismissed it, actually daring the Muslims to fight them. This led to a swift 15-day siege. As a direct result of this violation and their refusal to honor the peace, the Banu Qaynuqa surrendered and were exiled from Medina. Moving chronologically, we arrive at Section 4, the conspiracy of Banu Nadir, leading to escalation and exile. This takes place following the Battle of Uhud, which saw heavy Muslim losses, and the incredibly tragic, deceptive assassination of over 70 Muslim scholars by outside tribes. So at this point, tensions in Medina were at an absolute boiling point. And the escalation here happened so fast. Step 1, a Muslim emissary mistakenly killed 2 individuals from an allied tribe, which meant blood money had to be paid. As per the Charter of Medina, Prophet Muhammad approached the Banu Nadir to ask for their shared contribution. Step 2, instead of paying, the source accounts detail a shocking conspiracy to assassinate the Prophet by literally dropping a boulder on him from a wall he was sitting under. Step 3, a divine warning alerted him, prompting a sudden retreat. This assassination attempt completely shattered their treaty. The Banu Nadir were ordered to leave, but a hypocrite leader in Medina, Abdullah bin Ubay, falsely promised them military backup if they stayed and fought. Well, that backup never arrived, bringing us to step 4, a 6-day siege and their eventual exile. Which leads us to the real climax of the Medina conflicts. Section 5, the Trench and Banu Qurayza, representing the ultimate betrayal. The remaining Jewish tribe in Medina, Banu Qurayza, was about to be tested by the most immense threat the city had ever faced. 10,000. Just think about the sheer scale of that for a second. That is the size of the army the Quraysh of Mecca amassed to march on Medina. The Muslims were vastly outnumbered, surviving only by digging a massive, impassable trench around the vulnerable parts of the city. With an army of this size waiting just outside the gates, the city's survival hinged completely on internal unity. And that is exactly when the ultimate betrayal occurred. The source narrative details that the Banu Qurayza broke the joint defense clause of the Medina Charter. They secretly allied with the besieging Quraysh army, formulating a plan to attack the Muslim women and children from inside the city walls. This would have effectively trapped the defending Muslims in a devastating pincer movement. It's wild to think about, but according to the accounts, the Muslims were only saved when a strategic, secret conversion to Islam by a man within the enemy ranks allowed him to sow distrust between the Quraysh and the Banu Qurayza, completely collapsing their alliance before the attack could even be executed. So, the crucial point is what happened next. Once that 10,000-strong army was repelled by severe weather, the Muslims laid siege to the treasonous Banu Qurayza. When they surrendered, Prophet Muhammad allowed an arbitrator from the Aus tribe, who were actually historic allies of the Banu Qurayza, to determine their fate based on their broken agreements. Sa'ad bin Mu'adh delivered a severe wartime verdict. The combatant men were to be executed, women and children taken as captives, and their wealth distributed. It was a brutal, definitive end to the internal threat, rooted directly in the source's account of high treason during a critical siege. So, this leaves us with a massive question, right? With Medina now completely secured and those internal factions removed, where did the previously exiled forces go? Where did they gather their strength to continue their opposition? They went to Khaybar, Section 6, Khaybar and the final outcome, where the stronghold falls. Khaybar was a formidable city of fortresses, basically serving as the new headquarters for the exiled tribes. After the Treaty of Hudaybiyah finally neutralized the external threat from Mecca, the Muslims marched on Khaybar to deal with the stronghold once and for all. Let's move to and see how this builds to a truly legendary conclusion. The siege of Khaybar culminated in a famous duel right outside its strongest fortress. The Muslim champion Ali bin Abi Talib faced off against Marhab, the most renowned warrior of the opposing tribes. Ali's victory in this one-on-one duel broke the defense, leading to the fall of the fortresses and bringing the vast wealth and lands of Khaybar under Muslim control, which permanently ended the organized external threat from these factions. But, and this brilliantly illustrates the nuance of this history, our source leaves us with a fascinating, honestly sobering final thought. Despite the assassinations, the sieges, the 10,000-man armies, and the legendary fortresses, the source text asserts that the absolute greatest damage to the early Islamic movement didn't actually come from these recognized enemies. It came from the munafiqun, the hypocrites. People like Abdullah bin Ubay, who publicly claimed allegiance to the treaty but secretly worked to undermine, divide, and destroy the community from the inside out. Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder today. If massive external armies and heavily fortified strongholds couldn't destroy this movement, how much more dangerous is the enemy within? It's a recurring theme in history, isn't it? The walls we build to keep external threats out are practically useless if the foundation is crumbling from the inside. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep analyzing, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.